moon.
Awesome. Awesome.
Is there people listening in on the YouTube? I remember last week you were able to,
Oh yeah, yeah. We
tell if
can we
people
can
were.
see we can pull in the comments.
Imagine the day, Spencer and Eves, when 6 months time when we're going live, and there's like 20,000 people on YouTube just
Yeah.
waiting to hear what PodsDAO is going to decide for its level 2 for its multi singers. You know what I mean? What are they going to choose? Oh, tune in to PodsDAO tonight. Oh.
That's the dream.
Fuck. That's
People
the
getting
dream,
excited about this stuff. Yeah.
that is the dream. So anyway, how are you guys? Like, I was so nervous last week when I started this, because no matter how long you do audio podcasting, live video streaming is a different beast. And I realized looking back on it, like I just got stuck into it. Didn't say hello to good friends who we've been interacting with digitally for so long, yet not visually. So nice to see you in the flesh, Spencer. How's
Likewise.
it going? Yeah. How's
That's
your
good.
week
I
been?
actually I spoke a bit with Mercurial a few days ago about
Oh, here's
process
Jonathan.
for. Oh, is someone else joining?
Can you add him in? It's Jonathan's waiting in the back room.
What's up? What's up?
Yeah, here we go.
Hey.
There he is. What's up, my man?
Not much. Wrapping up my day. Got a few more things to do after this. Even more work to finish up, and then off to the night. See where the night takes me.
I'll just say the same thing I said to the guys, and we'll go back to Spencer. I was just saying, like last week, I was so nervous when we started. Like video is a different gravy than audio, and in the melee, like I didn't get to say like hello properly to the folks we've been interacting digitally, like you, Jonathan, me, and Spencer. Finally, we see each other in the flesh. There's no sort of real niceties, so good to see you, is what I'll say, in the flesh.
Yeah, great to see you in the flesh. I know I've been on your show, and we've had lots of offline conversations.
Yeah.
And never also formally said hi to Spencer, or I don't know how you say your first name, Mr. Edwards.
Why Vez?
What? Wyvez?
It's like the thing I always say is well, I either say just think of Christmas Eve, or like Yves Saint Laurent, the designer.
Mm.
So yeah, I don't know if that's, I feel like that's a common thing. Maybe I'm just getting old. I don't know. I feel like YSLs, everyone knows Yves Saint Laurent, but maybe I don't know.
Eves. Yeah, I don't know what it stands for, but I know YSL.
Okay, yeah, it's just a French name, I guess.
French
yeah,
name,
I'm not
Yves Laurent.
not too
Yves
sure on
Saint
the meaning.
Laurent, yeah. Maybe you've heard of the perfume Yves Saint Laurent. No, that's the only French sort of brand that I can think of. Anyway, folks are probably listening in. Maybe I don't know. So let's maybe give them some structure for how this pod's gonna go, and then we'll quickly actually get onto your section, Spencer. So I don't mean to pause you too long, but we'll go through the quick structure. We'll deal with segment 1, if you like, and then we'll get on to segment 2, and then that's where you can get into your discussions with Mercurial and stuff. He's probably listening in on YouTube. We have some people in the live chat. So folks listening to this live or after, we're going to do segment 1, which is just a quick, what did we get done in terms of the easy wins this week, and then kind of brainstorm amongst us here what other quick easy wins we could do in the next week for PodsDAO. Segment 2 is the bigger things, the values, the foundations for PodsDAO, which Spencer here and rather Mercurial have been thinking about in the background. There are governors, which I love that word, governors.
It'll catch on.
That's so cool. It will catch on. I'm gonna have a channel in there in the DAO, yeah, governors. Anyway, and get an update from what they talked about, and then just sort of ask some key questions like what's our scope, purpose, values, this kind of thing. So put it out there for discussion. And then really if we get on to anything else in this hour, because I have to be away on the hour, but maybe Yves can carry on if he has time. we were thinking about how we start to put out some anti-establishment messaging, build up that culture. Should we put it out in a provocative tweet per week? Should we put out some memes? But we kind of want to start thinking about how we build that side of our identity, so that we're not just some to steal. And then the last segment, which we're really not going to have time for, but anyway, is we thought, we want to structure these kind of episodes where we talk 50% about DAO business and building public DAO, bring everyone into it, 50% or even 75%, whatever. And then the last bit, half hour if we can or whatever, we pick a topic of choice, mental health in Web3, I don't know, whatever else is going on. Maybe an episode of a particular pod struck us in our network and we want to talk about that. But that's just to bring engage podcasters to come on so that they could have their say and get elevated a bit, but also like it's not so boring and stale for the public to watch these episodes. There's some content there as well. So we're going to talk about how that could look like. I'm probably not going to get onto it, but if you're watching, that's what we're going to try and get to. So let's start off with segment one. The 20% easy wins. So Eve's helped me out here. I'll probably forget them, but we made some clips of last week's episode and got it out. We touched base with a few more pods and a couple more in. I've got a list of like 10 we've been reaching out to. Those are relatively easy wins. Eve's is going to set us up on TikTok, Insta, and Lens. Hopefully tomorrow, Eve's, I think. Clinomenic and Rather Mercurial this week had a chat, and we're going to get set up on GitHub. More of that in a second. But relatively easy win. Unless I'm missing anything, Eve, because that was pretty much it, right? Was there anything else?
Not that I can think of. No, 20% wins, 80% wins. The sort of anti-establishment.
Just on the 20% wins, I think that was the tick that we got done this week. So we wanted to throw it out to people in the chat and you guys here on the call. What would you, just in terms of other 20% wins you can think about, like the easy shit that we can do in the next week? Maybe something's on. What do you guys think? Is there anything else that we're like, let's just get that done?
One of the things that Mercurial and I were talking about in terms of easy things to get the ball rolling is just deciding. This is what you said we will talk about later in this episode: the values, the purpose, PodsDAO. If that can be expressed in a couple paragraphs, then that can eventually be like the mission statement clause in some kind of constitution. And we talked, because he's also into the legal engineering stuff, talked about whether or not a legal entity would be needed, all this stuff. But in any case, it would be great to have some kind of agreement on the core values or purposes, because then it would make all these conversations about tooling and monetization a bit easier if we're all in alignment on what it is we're trying to do. So I think in terms of a concrete thing, if there's just some kind of a paragraph or two kind of mission statement for PodsDAO or purpose, stuff in that area, eventually that can be included in some constitution, if that's of interest to people. That's what the conversation I had with Mercurial led to.
Cool. So I'm just going to make a note of these easy wins. Anybody else?
Well, I think on that same sort of question of the core purpose of the DAO, I think I saw this floating around in our chat, but also deciding who a member is. Are people joining who are just hosts? Is it the podcast itself that's a member? Could the producer join, the engineer? Who exactly should be a member of this DAO was another good question to tackle kind of early on, I think.
So okay, let me share some thoughts on both these. Not in terms of I have the answers, but just because what Rather Mercurial he's probably listening in now and is going to say is, the way I understood Rather Mercurial saying it is almost like sort out the purpose first, then who the members are kind of flow, because questions of who is only podcast hosts members, or is it contributors, that kind of flows from, do we want to be a PodsDAO that really prioritizes money for the hosts? Then contributors a little bit less. Are they full members less? What's our kind of values? Like everyone who's contributing, no matter what they do for us, equal member, because that's our ethos, and then it kind of flows from that. So that's the way I understood their advice. All these questions kind of flow once you've sort of really got your values down and what's what. Clinimatic, you're the governor. Maybe you've something to say on that. But these all need to be worked out pretty pronto. The only thing I'd say is, like, me and Eves just mentioned this, didn't we, before we started, Eves? It's like, do we worry about sorting all these questions out now? Because we kind of have to be able to move the ball. But say if there's only 4 of us now on the call, a couple of people joining on chat, we download, a couple of people have their comments in the Telegram this week. Are we leaving 80% out? What's their say? So we said, should we start these discussions now, kind of get it in a direction, and then whoever joins next week can feed in, so we kind of socialize the values over the course of the next 3 or 4 weeks. So at least we can kind of go, all right, not everybody got their say, but like we did a few weeks, like that's decent, you know? So how quickly do you think we have to sort definitively these questions, or maybe we just have to get the ball rolling?
I mean, I think what you were saying, like at the end of the day, we can't like adhere to. We can have ideals, right? But there's no like perfect way to do it that's perfectly decentralized and perfectly leaderless and perfectly, not a horizontal or not a vertical hierarchy, and but I think, yeah, I would imagine that's the trajectory, like you're saying. We do it for a couple of weeks, see what everyone thinks, we get a consensus, and then, I mean, just because we're sort of setting them in stone now so that we can move forward doesn't mean that they won't sort of like evolution, chips away over time, like little additions will be made here and there, and so I think that'll work itself out, I guess. Yeah, it's a natural, I guess it's a natural process. That's kind of how I see it, and I don't see anything. My point in saying this is I don't see anything necessarily wrong. Like, I know it's a touchy subject, but with like if we go a couple of weeks and not many other people turn up, it's like, well, what are we supposed to do, guys? that yeah. So I think it's sensible.
Moving the ball. Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you make it open in the future for change, you know what I mean? As long as you keep it open. If we go on and go, well, this is what it's about, and that's it, screw you if you're trying to do this, and you know what I mean? Like, oh, that's not a good idea, we don't agree, then yeah, that's not a good path forward.
Okay.
One other thing that...
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
It's just a slight topic change, but within the 20% conversation. So if you wanted to add something to what Yves was saying, you should go first.
No, because I'm gonna leave it to the next segment. It fits in nicely there. I was gonna bring it back to the 20% just to see if there's any last easy wins, and then move on, flowing into the bigger questions. Yeah.
So I think one other easy thing we could do would be to set up. We had talked about in the last call a mirror page to start documenting the journey of PodsDAO, somewhere to put that mission statement once we have it, who we are, etc. I think that's another easy win. And if we don't have it already, we probably are going to want one, maybe email address to use on all of these accounts, where people could start contacting the PodsDAO as well. And I'm happy to help set up the...
we have an email address used. Do we...
No, we don't. So
but we need to figure. We have a Gmail that we use. To
yeah.
YouTube channel and stuff. PodsDAO. Can we? Is that something that we can use? Perhaps in all these things, it's who gets access and stuff. But we have that. with a mirror, that's a blog, isn't it, Jonathan? That's where people would say document in written form what's going on here and track
Exactly. Yeah.
That's like an accompaniment to the podcast episodes that we're doing here. Someone would do it in written form. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We could even upload the
Is there any just on
transcripts
that? Is there
of
any-
these podcasts up there.
Okay, yeah, that's a cool idea.
And that's a good idea. With the SEO, you were saying that's a good idea, isn't it? Yeah. And
It's also
include
good for
podcasts that were on it. So yeah.
Oh, I mean, it's uploading it to Mirror is also good because I think it saves to Arweave. I think that's the decentralized database that it gets published to. So it's like a good censorship resistant storage of a lot of this stuff too, which is sort of one way of walking the Web3 walk rather than just talking about it to an extent. Not that like the transcripts are like super politically sensitive things that are going to get censored by governments or anything.
Oh, well.
So far.
But give us time. give us a minute, Clint. Can't burn the system down in 2 weeks. Is there any other blog platforms that are written form that are not that are either Web3 or Web2 that we should be on?
Paragraph.xyz is a newsletter, which it can work in a Web2 way, but you can also token gate it and do all the fancy Web3 stuff. That's pretty intuitive, but you can also treat it like a normal Web2 newsletter for people that aren't as into or as literate with all the Web3 stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm not super familiar. So if
you 20, yeah, go ahead.
No, just I was saying I'm going to say I'm not super familiar with Mirror. Pretty sure I've been there before, but like I don't know the ins and outs. And same with I guess the sort of like blogosphere. I'm not like too aware of what's going on there. So yeah, I guess it would be interesting to hear like what you guys think and why and like what.
Well, just in the interest of time, maybe we can come back to that one. Just looking at it's 20 past. We can maybe even find someone in the DAO who wants to take that on and do blogs every week or every 2 weeks or whatever it is, and who can give us a download. We also need to think about ways to incentivize people to do that. That's maybe going to come out of the discussions on the next segment here. So is there any other 20% to note down that anyone can think of, easy wins? Before we move on?
I mean, I think Jonathan's point about talking about other recent episodes of podcasts in the network is a great like conversation material for this podcast, but also a great way to promote podcasts in the network. So the various podcasts that are already affiliated with Blockchain or the handful of other podcasts in this network so far, if there's any new episodes that we listen to between, come every one of these episodes, highlighting those and talking about those, I think it's a good way to kind of, I don't know, like more tightly integrate this network of podcasts creators.
And that's also good because obviously it's going to be interesting for people to listen to that. We'll include the podcasters to come on the show to do it. We'll create good content that's actually topical and not just business, but also we can tag the podcasters in their network. And then that's good network effects and all that stuff. Okay, cool. Yep.
Do you want to go on to the Yeah, no, I was going to say, do we want to go on to the 80%?
Yeah.
So, okay, yeah, I guess let's just get started. Unless you guys want to, have got anything to say, obviously I don't want to jump the gun. So, purpose. What in everyone's opinion is our purpose? So, what is the DAO?
Do you want to start, Kinematic, with? Well, just to set the scene, did you do, because there's maybe something you and Rather Mercurial thought about this and did some meeting in the background. Do you want to set the scene with that, then we can dive into the questions, because I'm assuming the questions will come out of that naturally.
Yeah, so last week, Rather Mercurial and I spoke about a lot of this stuff, a lot about like tooling and governance structure, which DAO contracts and legal entities, really big picture stuff that may not even be a concern in the near term, or depending on what PodsDAO wants to do may not even need a traditional legal entity. But like all this stuff, like big stuff that shouldn't preoccupy us too much right now, in my opinion. And I think he was of a similar opinion. But we both agreed that regardless, like if we do end up moving in the direction where we do need to sort out a lot of that complex stuff, it would need to probably start from some organic place of alignment having to do with what PodsDAO is intended to promote and what its purpose is. And so stuff like we've talked about in the previous episode of, I think actually it was Mercurial that made that comment, like what does an individual stand to gain from this collectivistic podcast approach they wouldn't be able to do as an individual? And so how do we build around that and make it not burdensome to be a part of, or like asking too much of contributors if they can just tune in and get some value in an easy way, I think. And I think there are ways to do that with all this like co-promotional stuff we're talking about and, promoting each other's podcasts. A lot of it does seem to involve just getting aligned on the basic mission, stuff like that. And then it'll be easier to identify when we need tooling for this and that, because it's really easy to overcomplicate all this stuff, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And the way Rather Mercurial put it to me, I'm just going to bring it up here, and it leads on to that question I want you guys to think about, or we can all think about, obviously. He was like, the purpose of the Rebel, like, for example, what's the purpose? E.g., the purpose of the Rebel Alliance is to restore peace to the galaxy by defeating the evil empire. Now, that's a very politically aligned purpose. So I want to ask you guys, like, this is sort of the kind of thing that we have to think out. And the way I would put that question back to us at PodsDAO is, what is our long-term goal here? Like, are we, because it's going to influence the way we build this, we just want to bring in as many podcasters as possible, no matter how, like, small they are. There's no entryism. We just build massive network, focus on the message. So that in 5 years' time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time, we're all proud of moving the decentralization and anti-establishment ball well down the, like progressively we're responsible. We're like, yeah, we did that, right? That's one political thing. And you bring in so many podcasts, and even if they're not bringing in massive views over time or whatever, we don't care, because they're just there, they're part of the network, every little helps. Or do we get a little bit more sort of focused, like in a different way on the message? So like you could say that first thing is diluting the message, maybe, because all right, bigger network, and if they're touching on decentralization even a bit, good, because it's a bigger network. But it also, bigger doesn't mean it could be diluted in the message, so you bring in less podcasts but more focused on the message. So that's that over there on the message. Now, are we more focused on that, or are we more focused on actually just want to make this kind of, we want to lift 500 podcasters in 2 years, 3 years time out of their job so that they can creatively do this. They can, and that has all sorts of good connotations and good stuff for the individual and also for the space, and really focus on that. So less on the message, but we orientate our operations to get as many in as possible and make them a living. Or again, don't want to do too many in. We can't bring in that much money to bring everyone out of their jobs. So less podcasters in, still focused on them leaving their jobs, but less in so that smaller group get more money. Like, because I don't know if I'm articulating that right, but it seems like there's two core missions of this thing: political and get people out of their jobs and give creators a way to live. How do we balance those? And are they mutually exclusive? I don't know. Like, maybe not. Like, maybe we can do both. Maybe one leads into the other. Like, more people see the message and they're like, fuck, I'm joining that. Fuck, I'm giving money to that. So I want to put it back to you guys. Like, it's not the definitive question. It's just one. How do we think about our purpose, goals, mission, objective, scope, in terms of those two things? I'm not going to kick it down anyone in particular. You can just have your say if you want.
I mean, the point you brought up about enabling people to make a living doing what they love, in this case, creating podcasts. I think to me, it kind of boils down to that, like that I kind of think of as the North Star for this. And then a lot of the political statements, I think, can actually be embodied in how we're organized. If we're organized in a really horizontal way and we manage to succeed in enabling more people to, turn their passions into more of a viable career opportunity, then that is kind of a political statement if we manage to do that in a horizontal way. But I think a lot of it, to me at least, a lot of it boils down to just enabling people to do what they find fulfilling in a way that's financially sustainable for them.
Yeah. You're right. That's a really interesting way of looking at it. By actually taking people out of their doldrums job and giving them this life in Web3 is political. I mean, that's the whole purpose of Web3 democratic economy and all that. I mean, that's the best statement in and of itself. You know what I mean? That's the proof in the pudding. It's not, oh, you get talk a big game about decentralization on your podcast. How about just do it? How about just get more people in decentralized governance so they have time to do decentralized governance because they're not in a 9-to-5? That's the best case. That's the best thing you could do. So, okay. I don't know why that didn't hit me before. And also, that seems to be the engine. You build that engine, more people do come in because they see we're successful. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And maybe because decentralization messages alongside that are tied to that success, more people are just open to decentralize. They're like, oh, it fucking works, doesn't it? Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, I wasn't so big on decentralization and stuff before, but yeah, I'm in. Okay, yeah. Anybody else?
I guess the question I'm thinking about is, do we want to then do any gatekeeping at all? Like, should this just be for crypto podcasts or any podcast that wants to tap into Web3 on some layer, even if their focus is cheeses or something, can join the PodsDAO?
I knew we were missing something. I knew we were missing.
Exactly. We're missing Gouda. That's exactly what it is. And then
we're missing one quarter. We haven't got one quarter sorted. It's fromage. Okay, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking that also, like, crypto makes strange bedfellows, right? So do we want podcasts that maybe the core members of the DAO may not be politically aligned with? Are they still okay in the DAO if they're also horizontally organizing with us and they're contributing and so? If I don't know, if, like, this is obviously an extreme example, but Richard Spencer was at one point promoting Bitcoin. If he has a podcast where he talks about Bitcoin, do we want him in the DAO, and are we going to gatekeep him and say no? I would like to think we would not include Richard Spencer, but that's something to also think about in terms of what we stand for. So maybe that means something like, rather than saying we are explicitly anti-authoritarian by nature of the DAO, we have a statement where we say we accept anybody regardless of blah 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 blah, regardless of their ethnic background, sexuality, gender identity, whatever. Maybe we include that as part of our mission statement, and not go so far as to say, we are anti this, or we are anti government DAO and blah 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 blah.
I mean, I think it's an interesting.
Okay, so let me. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think that's interesting. And one about that example, and even though you used an extreme example, and there could be other examples where maybe someone comes in and people are kind of have reservations about being associated with them. I think maybe, and I'm not sure how this would be structured, how much structure would even be needed for this, is like if someone who's really controversial or extreme like that comes into this network and wants to become a part of this network, if the majority of other podcasts as like individual projects don't like this person or this group, then they're going to have a tough time leveraging this kind of network effect. So I'm not sure how best that would be structured, where like your success in this network depends on how well you align with the majority of people in this network. I don't know if there's a way to do that without there being some like core federal team or whatever that you need to appeal to, or who manages all the tooling involved in token gating and all that. I am curious, because I think a lot of this stuff can be done in a pretty horizontal way that honestly may not even require a legal entity or anything like that, beyond just like you said, having an email address and managing some kind of web presence, stuff like that, and like hosting this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I guess.
Can I share some thoughts on that question?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'll go get this out. And then I need it'll flow out one way or the other. But yeah, just I suppose I was listening to Rug Radio, and they dealt with this question in the context of censorship. Like, how are you pro censorship? You know, crypto's supposed to be pro censorship, or sorry, anti censorship, and yet how would you deal with this question of dodgy figures of all sorts coming into the DAO? And the way they answered it was, yeah, when it comes to like sort of like you know, kind of figures that you mentioned, Jonathan, of white nationalists or whatever, fascists, etc., they don't allow them into the DAO, but their distinction was we can't not let them own our assets. Okay, so that was their distinction. They're not part of the club, but we can't stop them buying our assets. Now, we don't have any assets. I don't know if we have ever assets that the public would buy to trade and all this stuff. But maybe we can think about, like, just the way we think about it is we allow anyone in. We have like broad-based values that you can't cross any line on. Like, I think white nationalism clearly is one of them. But if there's anyone who's like, I don't know, I don't know, like something more moderate, but still like the majority of the DAO is like, I think could you have some voting system where like 85% of the DAO pod hosts have to vote yes to let them in? I don't know, something like, I want to run an ad for this VC firm. None of you else have to do it, but I do. Or I don't know, something like that. Who knows, right? Where it's just like, now the reason why 85% is because I think like the network effects, as Clean Medic said, like we're all going to be dependent on each other to share our content. There's going to be mutual collaborations in the network all the time. The big guys, the little guys will have to come up with a model that shares everybody else's content in really unique ways. And so if the majority or a substantial part of the podcast hosts don't want to do that for any particular pod host, that's not going to work. Do you know what I mean? Like they're irrelevant then. They don't have any place in the network because nobody will be sharing their content. So they're almost defunct. They're there but not useful. So to get everybody's collaboration in network effects, you have to have an overwhelming majority happy. So I think that's almost the reason. How you work it out, don't know. I think there just has to be like clear ways, and it gets awkward after. I mean, who's allowed in the DAO as an active participant, equal member? It seems to be maybe a more easy answer, because it's just easier. What if one podcast host has a controversial figure on to discuss some controversial topics? Does the DAO kick up a fuss about that, or is the best way to handle it some other podcast in the network calls out that podcast and says they did it? Yes, they're part of the DAO. It's not the DAO's values, but look, that's our line for freedom of speech, that they had someone on, I don't know, like a right anarchist or something who just wants to like sort of create an Ayn Rand society or something. We wouldn't have had him on. They're over there doing that Bitcoin-y thing, and we're over here and we're going to just talk about what they talked about and dispel it and argue against it. Is that like a balance where you have free speech? A balance, I don't know, but maybe these things need to be worked out. Yeah, Eve, sorry, I've talked long enough. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, personally, I always prefer to go with solutions that, I guess, are somewhat neutral, but also, as effective as they need to be. So, for example, there was someone in a group chat I'm part of that came in and was talking a lot about anti-Semitism and all that kind of stuff. And there was this exact conversation, right? Like, is this freedom of speech? Like, what's the group's stance on it? Da, 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 da. And someone came up with the at least the sort of solution, or one solution that I liked. They just said, like, guys, like, maybe we shouldn't kick him out, but if you don't want to see his messages, you can personally, like, block that person, and then you won't see him in the chat, and you're not inhibiting on anyone else's freedom to interact with that person. You also, like, still have the ability to choose for yourself, like, do I want to see that? And it's sort of, I guess, in a way, you could see it as like the digital equivalent of, like, you don't have to listen to a person anymore. Like, you can kind of walk away from someone if you don't want to, like, converse, IRL with them anymore, rather than, like, shoving them away from you, like, as in, like, like, or keep, locking them away or that kind of thing. It's sort of like we're just walking away, and not, you're essentially just, like, going like this. You don't have to listen to them. I just like those kind of solutions. Yeah, and I think like another one no, go ahead.
It's how I was just gonna say it's how that sort of thing where you can just sort of not follow someone in a Discord, how that's different from them being a podcast in a network that will depend on them to be an active, full member with every responsibility that everybody else has, and you almost have to be on board with whoever is in, because you have to be comfortable to spread their message. Basically, if we don't have everyone in the network at least open to sharing anybody else's content, then everyone starts, it's a slippery slope to going, oh, but I don't like that about that, and I'm not totally on board. You kind of just have to be settled enough in yourself broadly about the content to at least be able to share it, even if you don't have a care in the world about fashion and crypto, or I don't know, like, whatever, like music and crypto is not your bag. I mean, unless you're actively so against it, you kind of just have to share it for this to work. So if there is someone who it's repulsive to everyone, like, it's just not going to work. I don't think it's not that we can just stick them in the corner to do less content. But maybe we can come back to this. I'm just looking at the time. Jonathan raised another question earlier. Should the membership be just podcast hosts? Should contributors who aren't hosts also be full members? How do we think about that in terms of, again, questions later on about revenue splitting, governance rights? Seems like one of the key things we should sort out pretty early. My default would be to include contributors of all sorts, producers, social media people should be included, and you build the model around what they've done to increase the network effects, rather than just, are they creating content? But that's just me now. I might change that. How does everybody else think about that? John, maybe you've arrived. Maybe you want to pop in and give your say on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I know I have my own show, but if Crypto Sapiens was my only podcast that I was a part of, and I'm on the back end there, I do a lot of the producing, I do all the audio visual editing. If that were my only project, I would still think that I would have a place in the PodsDAO, because although my message may not be direct as far as, like, in the camera, in the mic, my message is through my editing and through the writing and the production. So it's an indirect messaging.
Yeah. And also, like, if how do we weigh up if the whole game is network effects, spread the message, sponsors, grantees, ads, want to sponsor us and fund our creators to live, if that is the whole pipeline of us taking people out of work and giving them a solution for life here, then it seems to me like, how do you weigh up the value that a podcast host creates the content? Okay, but what if the producer's banging out tweet after reshare after blog after, yeah, not even in the background stuff that you talked about, which is all incredibly valuable, but even on the front end, tweets, the host isn't doing anything of that. So when the value is the network effects, how do you weigh up what's better than the other? You know what I mean? So yeah,
In a lot of cases, the host is not even the one that creates the most content. There's a whole team. The host is just the tip of the iceberg in a lot of cases.
I mean, it could be something where
just the half-drunk Irish folk with a microphone in their hand who's bullshitting.
It could be something where anyone involved in a podcast is able to be a member, and perhaps even people who aren't part of a podcast but are podcast enthusiasts or something can be part of this kind of community or whatever. But then each podcast can have its own designated like team wallet or wallet to receive donations, and that's how we can facilitate like profit sharing and stuff like that through splitting revenue for ads or like if PodsDAO is eventually going to do something like a grants program for Web3 native podcasts or something like that, there would need to be some kind of designated wallet address for these podcasts to receive funds. So like that can be how the podcast itself is represented in the network, and then all the individuals affiliated can all individually be members and contribute however they like. That's at least one way to think about it.
So let me ask one more question and then come back to that, because that seems like that's the whole federated model of sort of, if you think about it, little pods. The pods is their own little sub category of the collective. Maybe we give some sort of budget down to them that they decide on their team, and their team only shares their content, maybe some other content, but largely they're a pod and they have some responsibilities of the collective. Or do we base it around sort of not such enclosed pods, because then the risk is that they'll just do their own thing too much, and build it around the collective, but still some autonomy to the pods? Let me get on to that in a second, but I just want to ask one more thing on this before we move on, because that's almost the biggest thing. And I have this noted down, because Rog Radio does this, and I was like, I have to ask this on the next call. How much do we bring the audience into this, in terms of into the DAO, into the rewards, into the governance rights? Because again, if it's network effects and our audience is listening to the content, so driving the view count, they're sharing, retweeting, liking, they're setting up their own Twitter spaces in time to talk about the latest episode of PodsDAO, but they're not part of the network doing that. Like, do we just go, yeah, thanks, but yeah, you're not getting any of the rewards? Or do we have to include them? How does everyone feel about it? And that's not just audience, by the way. You just said it there, Cleanomedic. You're like, you could be a pod host. You could be a non-pod host, active contributor to a pod, social media guy, producer, or you could just be a podcast enthusiast, PodsDAO enthusiast who wants to link us up with different podcasts, who is like, I don't know, like thinking strategically for us about how to link us up with different sponsors, but you're not actually contributing to the production of a podcast. Do you know what I mean? You're contributing more to the overarching mission of the Alliance in some indirect. Do we just leave them out of the, like, so where do you get, well, then once you bring everybody in, okay, the network effects grow, but then does it just get too diluted? You may get people going, hey, I thought about this for you guys, like I should be a full damn member as everybody else, even though I did only one thing. So like, how do you guys think about that, the audience and then those other folks?
I guess it depends on what's at stake. Are they pulling funds out of the treasury as part of their contribution, or do they just have a name association? And I was sitting here looking up like how shortwave and ham radio collectives arrange those types of things. There's tons and tons of those types of collectives out there. How do they section off their contributors versus the actual people that broadcast? It might be something to research into.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that everybody who contributes to the growth of the DAO should be, if there's compensation involved, should be compensated in some way. And if that means that you're running, I mean, you could be working 40 hours a week, doing all this coordination for PodsDAO. And I think that should be something, again, if we get compensation involved, that should be something compensatable, just as if you have a podcast that you're placing an ad on. I don't know if it's the same bank that everybody's drawing out of, or if there's separate funds. If we have like a fund specifically for paying core contributors, and then a fund that specifically for paying out ad revenue. I'm not completely sure, but I do like the idea, like Eureka John was saying, that I mean, like, the audio editor for my podcast probably works as many hours as I do on the podcast, just for how long it takes to edit the audio.
Yeah.
And that's a huge contribution, and that's like one of the top compliments that we got on our most recent podcast from people, was like, wow, the audio quality is so great and so much better than the other interviews that these people have been on. So I do think, yeah, I'm not a fan of cutting those people out. And maybe it's selfish, because I would be cutting myself out, because I can't place ads on the Agenda podcast because I don't own the podcast. But I certainly want to help this DAO grow, and I want to find things I could be involved with. So yeah, I guess that's my thoughts.
Yeah, well, just on the point, Telegraph, even if you're like not an eventual full member, there should be, even maybe that's something to think about, how people can be part of the network but not full members, even if there are pods. Do you know what I mean? They, in some way, maybe there maybe should be something to be thought about for that. Does anybody else have any other climatic? Yeah. I
mean, about that point there, I mean, even as something as simple as the Telegram group grows, there was a Themes was asking, oh, is anyone able to help me with some editing? If she's able to make a connection through this network just like that, without almost any structure or on-chain stuff whatsoever, that's already an example of PodsDAO doing what it's supposed to be, or what it's arguably supposed to be doing, provided we're in alignment on stuff, something like that. And then to Jonathan's point about people getting compensated, this we had a I guess a challenge in Lobby 3 a little over a year ago, when like the way that was launched, it was highly kind of marketed as a speculative thing, even though it didn't really make much sense as a speculative project per se. But it attracted people that were kind of like speculating on the token more so than people that were attracted to the purpose or the mission. And so gradually, as people started realizing that this wasn't like supposed to be an investment per se, a lot of the token holders just kind of disengaged, and there was a big drop off in community engagement and participation and input. And so that left the few of us who were there for the mission, fewer and fewer of us there, and power and influence and decision-making capabilities kind of naturally consolidated there. And because there wasn't much of a community to be overseeing all this stuff, we had to kind of take initiative with the work that we thought needed to be done. And then when we would go about compensation in these retroactive compensations, where we would essentially just invoice the DAO and say, oh, over the last few months, I did such and such and such. I'm asking for 3 ETH, and then put that to a vote. And then there were some community members there who I think in good faith, however frustrating it may have been, argued that, oh, well, the community didn't tell you to do this work, so how can you expect to be paid for it if you're like telling yourself to do this work? You can't expect payment from a group when you're the one kind of guiding your own work that you're doing. And so I mean, I think it ultimately wasn't that much of an issue, but it brought up this point where if the actual core work being done to build this coalition it's tough to understand if it's a handful of people that are doing this coalition building effort. It requires a lot of initiative. I think even if that is the work that's being done and PodsDAO does accumulate some kind of treasury, whether it's through membership fees or donations or grants or whatever, the people doing that core work, I think, can take a similar approach of just retroactive compensation proposals. But that also runs the risk of like maybe the people voting on it, if it's all the people, however we define membership requirements, maybe they don't see the value, or maybe a lot of the work that you're doing is kind of like almost invisible work, or work that doesn't outwardly manifest as value immediately, as like immediate short-term value to people in the network. Anyway, it's just some considerations, and I think that retroactive compensation model could work for compensating people doing this kind of central coalition building work. But I'm curious what you guys think.
Yeah, I have talked a lot, so I'm conscious to shut up and let other people speak. But just on that, like at the core of this, it's gonna be the people who we're podcast style, right? Or PodsDAO, like, right? So that, it's kind of the people that kind of have to that are running it and benefiting the most from it have to be the kind of sort of the inner circle kind of have to be the hosts, and in there with them the producers, the core people in and around day to day who get an episode out, right? And almost like they're equal. That's like the first inner layer. Then the sort of maybe like the next outer layer, like in terms of right, what's going to help us grow here, like, and it's the network effect. So is the next one friends of the pod who proactively, quite a lot of the time, are resharing, blogging, and tweeting. So not for any specific pod and getting the episode out, but overall for the alliance that are making blogs, they're regularly tweeting stuff, like friends of the pods who are like proactively doing stuff, and they get rewarded based on a points model for how many blogs they do, how many retweets, whatever it is, right? But they're and abouts, that's the next circle, right? And then the next circle out is like anyone informally who's like just sharing stuff, so the general audience, and yet they should be kind of rewarded on ways that they feels fair. So like, if we're getting ad revenue based, for just example, right, we're talking about this ad view thing, right, and they see, right, well, I retweeted that, you got 100,000 views on that, I retweeted it, it got out to 1,000 people in the network, so I'm responsible for 1,000 views. Am I not getting any ad revenue money? Like you're all getting, like, I'm playing a part. It seems like they should be at least somehow rewarded of like a small percentage of the ad revenue on each video. And is there some way to track that on the blockchain, like what they've done, and then like a direct percentage of the ad revenue on that clip? I'm sure that's complicated, that's further down the line, but it seems like that's maybe a fair model. And then the coalition partners, like, who are the, not proactively sharing stuff, not the middle circle, but like the sort of people who come in, do a hit job, like, hey, I can link you up a lens, I've got my consultant there. Maybe the DAO just, okay, give us your proposal, and the core DAO is like, oh, right, okay, that seems legit, and it's a one-off payment, like for doing the job, buying one-off payment, be retroactive once they've done it, can be proactive to get it done. But they're like one people in, hit job, just helps out in and out. But there's always the three concentric circles based on priority of value. I personally don't think we can leave any of those circles out, and especially the outer circle. Like if we're talking about network effects, bigger network effects means more messaging, means more people see the message, means more people wanting to support us, grants or ads, then you should be rewarded for your contribution to grow those network effects, however loosely you are. It seems to me. What do you? Does that seem off? Does that seem unviable? Does that seem unfair? What do you guys think?
I mean, I don't necessarily think it's I suppose unviable. Depends, I guess, on the reward. I suppose you can have different levels of reward. But yeah, I suppose like in principle, I agree. Like if you're helping, you should be rewarded in whatever capacity, whether that's, and obviously the amount or whatever varies. But yeah, I mean, I guess you can't not reward people. I would think, like, yeah, well, why shouldn't they be rewarded? I mean, I guess my other thought with that is it opens up. Oh no, I was gonna say it opens up. Maybe it's an attack vector. Maybe it's the system gets abused, right? If you don't have some kind of restrictions on how or who gets it, does that system get gamed?
My thought that just comes to mind is
could get. Yeah.
I agree that there should be a way to kind of give back to the people that help grow the network. I don't know if that necessarily has to be payments or tokens. It could be NFTs. It could be merch. I don't know. My only kind of concern about that is, I don't know if concern is the right word, but like it adds a heavy lift potentially to the shows themselves to then track all of their fans. If you have 10,000 people, fans of your show, and all of them say something on Twitter about the episode, do you have to track 10,000 fans individually and determine how many times they shared something, what they said, and the impact that each of those had? So I think that's where that could get particularly tricky, and then adds a bit of a lift onto the podcast themselves. I mean, what if a podcast just wants to join to be a part of to build community with other podcasts, but they don't necessarily want to be I feel like we'd have to kind of brand every podcast as a PodsDAO show in order for this really to work. And I don't know if that's something that's truly practical, I guess I would say.
I have just a quick addition to that. So I can't remember exactly what it's called right now, but it's something like Spark Wave or something like this. And it's some kind of a platform where you can hook social media accounts up to it, and it kind of does the tracking for you. I'm sure there's also all kinds of things you'd have to work out. There's all sorts of work that would also have to be done, and as you mentioned, like how do we track it? But this at least makes the process a little easier. I think essentially what it does is it sort of, looks at uses the Twitter API or whatever it is, and it can see the interactions with your account, with the PodsDAO account, with certain tweets, and I think the idea is you just sort of connect your wallet, and some kind of reimbursement happens automatically. So I guess the idea is we as a DAO would put in $50 of Ethereum, and we say, hey guys, whoever has retweeted the most, who's ever done the most. I mean, this is sort of like a prize draw. This isn't necessarily like the reimbursement, everyone gets reimbursed kind of idea, but it just came to mind when you were talking about like how would we track. I remember there's this specific platform which I'll try and find it, but they were just doing this really simple way of you hook your Twitter up or you hook a couple of socials up, it just monitors the comments and whatever, and at the end of the month, it just automatically sends out a payment to the the most engaged person, basically.
This seems like a technical coordination problem that there's probably whiz kids out there to solve. I mean, you could maybe NFT a retweet and put it on the blockchain, and then someone would have to upload their retweet as proof to then be engaged in the reward. I mean, there's probably some sophisticated way to work it out. That's like way down the line. Then it gets even more complicated, I guess, and you'd have to think about it again when it comes to percentage share of the ad revenue on such a. I mean, maybe in the initial stages you could just say, sort of drop us a, there's not gonna be a load of people doing this straight off the bat. I don't know what the solution is, but I think we don't have to work out the solution. We just have to kind of think up now about whether we want to integrate the audience in the rewards in some way. I mean, how Web3 are we? Are we still Web3 in some way if we're not including all participants in the democratic economy process? Are we Web3 enough because we've taken the Spotify's of the world out and now we're just a podcast earning our own creative content? But are we leaving out other participants here who are can we get accused of being Web 2.5 is my point.
I mean, I think one aspect that, or one possible tool that may let us quantify some of this stuff and track it is what someone in the comments earlier suggested Lens, and they're already kind of tokenizing. I think like literally tokenizing followers and you're not. I don't think they're actually tokenizing posts, but they're all represented on chain or maybe on some non-blockchain distributed ledger. But in any way, it's all kind of captured in ways that can be queried and is probably censorship resistant, but I'm not familiar with Lens enough to really be confident in that. But I think Lens could be a way to make it easier to track some of this stuff and like automatically monetize some of it and in a Web3 native way. But I haven't gotten too deep into all the Lens monetization stuff, but I know they have some sophisticated things on the social experience layer. There's like various social media platforms built on top of Lens, and some of them let you like automatically, like you can collect posts and essentially donate to the poster, and then you can have set up splits so that the revenue automatically gets split up between people. So there's sophisticated little building blocks for what we're talking about there.
I will also say, like, Jonathan raised the point of like, is it going to be up to podcasters to track all the interactions? Seems to me like if it's kind of responsibility on almost on the person who's tweeted to prove that they did, and they've incentivized to do so because they're going to get paid if they do. So if I'm out there retweeting somebody's content and I'm going to get paid for it, I'm going to upload it. I'm going to prove it. You know what I mean? So it's kind of the onus is back on you to prove. Now, you could say, is that an unfair model? I am saying I proved it. Like, you accuse me not of, oh, you bad podcaster, dude. Like, but kind of like, you're going to get paid if you upload and prove it, and some verification process. So, back on the audience to prove it. And if they can, that's all the work for them. And then something like Arweave here, this guy's saying in the chat, posts and attachments are saved to Arweave. I'm sure there's some sort of technical fix. Let's go back to Clinomedic's point earlier, federated model, podcaster autonomy, and Jonathan raised it as well, vis-a-vis PodsDAO. What's the model for splitting the funds, sub-budgets to pods? Does every show have to have like a little PodsDAO icon in their overall icon? If we're using social media as our network effects sort of base to share stuff, to tweet stuff, do we have to get every pod in the network to have a little logo in their bio? I mean, what do you guys think about how podcasts, what's the responsibility, what's the collective nature of a vis-a-vis autonomy and just some of these key things? I mean, there's a whole whirlwind of questions here and interactions and responsibilities and blah blah blah, but just on how are we thinking about them maybe is how to start here instead of thinking we have to work it all out. do you lean instinctively more towards podcasters should have all the autonomy, lean heavily autonomy and collective fill in the gaps, or lean coordination around the collective and really have autonomy as on the strict things, like if they want to opt out of ads, if they want to um, not go hard tongues on anti-establishment messaging in a coordinated way. Like there's some opt-outs that it would be totalitarian or authoritarian for the collective to go, you must do that. Do you know what I mean? Or it should be just hands-off collective, just do what we can't do, and let us crack on with what we would do anyway.
Well, I'll say
Hard to
something,
answer
I
that
guess.
question without more. Yeah, go ahead.
What you were saying about, like, posting a logo and stuff like that, and it sounds a little bit like industry associations. I come from a manufacturing industry, and it was a hose manufacturing industry, and that was called NAHAD, National Association of Hose and Accessory Distribution. And in order to become a part of NAHAD, you had to pay some really outrageous fees. And then every year they had a big meetup at some fancy resort all around the world, and all these hose industry people would go there, and they would party, and they would network and shake hands with each other, distributors, manufacturers. And it was a jolly good time, but it was really expensive to be a part of it. But you paid for the right to have that NAHAD logo. So if a customer or somebody looking for a vendor would see that logo, they know you're legitimate. So you pay for your legitimacy. And that's a double-edged sword, because that's good, but it's also gatekeeping and exclusive. And it creates a good old boy system, and that's not what I think that this DAO is trying to establish. So, it's trying to create a critical mass by a bunch of people banding together, a bunch of podcasters banding together and saying, hey, we want to create something good and lift each other up, because the rising tide lifts all ships. But at the same time, if you have to pay a hefty entry fee and gatekeep that, then the people that can't do that and are anchored to the bottom end up drowning when the tide lifts.
I think all talk of entry fees, and me and Yves were discussing this last week, weren't we? It was off the back of some of the discussions on last week's episode about courses, fees to enter, to then get stuff out of it. It puts too many burdens on the DAO. First of all, it sets up sort of a top-down relationship, but it's also, if we want to be a DAO that brings in small podcasters who just have a small mic in their damp room in Indonesia, right? And they haven't enough money to afford £5 every, like, I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it could be to someone out there. And even the thought of it, they start off at 5, it'll probably be 20 next month. It automatically is excluding people around the world. So I think that entry fee, we should be always thinking of ways of how to give back, not how much you have to pay to be a part of something. When the core offering seems to be content equals eyeballs equals money for content, eyeballs on content, that's something that's free to us, or at least the cost to every podcaster to make the content. If we do this right in time, the benefits that we're going to get in money far outweighs the cost that the podcaster pays to set up their podcast. You know what I mean? So we as a DAO we don't need to charge anyone. Like, we can just say, you're giving us collectively your content, your body of work, and we're using that body of work together to bring in money for all of you. Charging is just the wrong way to think about where we're getting our money from. The value is the content. Everyone combines it, gets out to the world. Everyone tweets and likes each other, and then the money flows into us, right? Not the reverse. Do you know what I mean? And the more people who are involved in that process, the more network effects, the more eyeballs, more content, more eyeballs, more money. That's the way I would think about it. I did have another point. I've now forgotten it. Yeah. Nah,
Can I put in one more thought?
yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So it is kind of a double-edged sword both ways, because you have to have some kind of central core leadership to make decisions about who's contributing. But there has to be some kind of quantification process in there as well. But you can't quantify everything, because then that turns into a machine, like a Moloch, and then people start gaming that machine. So you either have people at the top making decisions, or you have a complete machine doing a UBI like system that people can game. So where's the middle ground in between both of that, and what you're explaining about maybe these 3 concentric circles of levels that might mediate some of that. But yeah.
Well, yeah, that might go some way to split off the different participants in the whole ecosystem. And then you may have the next question is within the core centric circle, the core circle, i.e. the podcasters and the contributors to each podcast. What if some of the bigger wheels go, look, I'm the big wheel here. Like, 4 or 5 of them get together and say, look, we're the bigger wheels. We're all in on the collective, love it, love it. But we're the big wheels here, and yet we have responsibility as part of the collective to retweet the small wheels. So we're the big wheels, we're helping the small wheels, and yet we're getting the same money as everybody else. Who's us? All the same podcasters are getting the same split of the ad revenue. How does that work? What? That seems like communism, bro, or something. Do you know what I mean? Like, everyone gets their fair share, or everyone gets the same share. Can that work? I mean, is that going to cause a row? Is that what we want? Do we have to have a more sophisticated model of that than that? Then that gets a slippery slope into fights. So, I mean, but this is the reason why we're having these questions early. Like, what are our core values? And then if we sort out that, yeah, no matter what, how big you are coming in, how big you get when you're in over time, part of that's down to your content, part of that's down to the collective. But anyway, yeah, you're big. But when you joined, you knew what the rules were. You knew we're all trying to lift all boats, and everyone gets $5,000 a month in 4 years' time because that's what makes everybody eat. You knew the rules when you're getting in. Tough. Leave if you don't like it. If that's our value set from the start, fine. It can change in time. It gets difficult if we do change it in time, but it seems like that these are the sort of questions that we should think about now. So the rules are there. We kind of know the direction we're headed, i.e. no fights come later on. And these are tough questions. I don't think anyone's got the right answer. I mean, you could fall on that either way. And it's going to be tough for a big whale to go, screw the little dudes. Tough. Do you know what I mean? It's going to be very hard to say that. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're going to come across as a monster, but you equally could think like, okay, maybe they get $8,000 a month. Everybody else gets the top guys get 8, the middle guys get 5, the small fish get 3. Then in time, 9, 7, 6.5. So the boat goes up for everyone, and the maybe it narrows over time, but still there's a differentiation. I mean, how do we think about that? How does that sit with you guys? Again, don't have to work it out now, but I do think we have to think about these kind of values early on, because it's going to be key pretty quickly, especially when the money rolls in. I mean, 3 months down the line when we do bring money in, it's going to be relevant.
I mean, I guess I'm not inherently opposed to that conceptualization. So the way you described it sort of makes me think of, I guess the difficulty adjustment in Bitcoin, and that's like incredibly successful. As in the way that it gets like harder and harder over time, and but you were saying the difference between the people that are getting $8,000 or whatever, at the top and the bottom, or at the other ends, are it's getting closer and closer over time. And then I guess to go back to what the communism point, the sort of comment that you made. Yeah, and then over time, I guess it does stabilize, right, and everyone's getting the same. Yeah, I'm not saying I think that's the model to use. But yeah, I'm not like inherently opposed to it, I guess.
It could be that at the start there's some at least stability in the early stages where we drive for a target of getting everybody $2,000. Like we've already decided, like that should be a good target. I mean, maybe for the first 2 years, second year we strive to get everybody 3.5 or 3, and then over time, as it kind of, there is some differentiation in sizes and who's down to who, and naturally you can see sort of these things, people saying I should be getting more or less than others. It seems after that initial stage of building solidarity and cohesion and collective, where everybody eats at least a minimal viable standard of food on the table, then when the money's really rolling in 4 or 5 years, we've made it big, there's a question then can be asked, like who eats more than others, you know what I mean, based on quantity, quality, all the rest of it. But we kind of want to reach Maslow's hierarchy of needs here first as a priority. We want to get everyone the base standard, lift as many as we can. Then when we've got a banquet, then we can share the banquet a little more unequally. I don't know. I mean, you know what I mean? But I haven't got. I'm not saying that's my view, because there might be people watching going, "You fucking stinking capitalist blockchain solidarity." So fucking caveating that. But I'm just throwing ideas out for people to think about. We don't have to work it out now or even in the next episode. I gotta go. So that's I have to bail out. But if you guys want to stay, I know there's other segments. These, if you want to lead the way, or if you have to leave too, that'll do for this week. But I gotta bounce. Thanks for coming, being part of a good discussion again, guys.
Yeah, it's been good.
Take care, everyone. Bye bye.
Yeah. All right.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.